Balake. Where is Balake at?
My name's Blake.
Do you want to go to war, Balake? I'm for real. Ron.
Ron is right here. Thanks for joining me, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Guys, one of the most common questions that comes up about David Miscavige and Scientology is, how is it that everyone in Scientology, it seems, is willing to put up with the kind of horrible abuse and mistreatment? They take all the abuse that he dishes out, and people really wonder about this and they don't understand it. And one of the reasons, of course, there's going to be more than one reason, but one of the reasons is that Scientologists are told and genuinely believe that L. Ron Hubbard himself selected David Miscavige to take over control of Scientology after L. Ron Hubbard passed. This story and this belief allows Scientologists to believe that the authority and the command, every one of the qualities that you could attribute to L. Ron Hubbard as a Scientologist, those essentially transferred to David Miscavige, and therefore Miscavige could do no wrong, because L. Ron Hubbard could do no wrong. When the fact of the matter is, David Miscavige was not selected by L. Ron Hubbard to take over control of Scientology. Scientologists have no idea that this is the case. And the fact is, there are a lot of Scientologists who watch my channel, watch Chris Shelton's channel, and I want to show you guys just a very specific excerpt from an interview. This is the interview that Mike Rinder did with Patrick Bet-David. It's a 2-hour fantastic interview. I'll put a link to that interview in the description down below. There's a segment of that interview where Mike Rinder explains what actually happened when LRH passed and who was really supposed to take over Scientology. And I want to share this with you. So watch this with me here, and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
You know what I'm asking?
I know exactly what you're asking. There was a couple who were the apparent heirs to the Hubbard empire called Pat and Annie Broeker. And they were with Hubbard. Hubbard went off... Hubbard was constantly running away, thinking that the FBI was after him or the IRS was going to serve him, and he had a car with a bag packed, ready to escape, and he did it a couple of times, and ultimately he ended up living in a motorhome on a ranch near San Luis Obispo in California. The only people that were with him when he was there were Annie Broeker, her husband, Pat, and this other guy called Steve Sarge Fouth. Annie Broeker and Steve Sarge Fouth were with him. Pat Broeker was the conduit go-between Hubbard and the outside world, and he wasn't actually with Hubbard a lot. But the natural heirs to the Hubbard kingdom were Pat and Annie. They were the people that he had chosen to be with him when he took off, and they lived with him in his motorhome for 2 years or more. I detail a lot of this in the book because Miscavige somehow managed to take out Pat and Annie Broeker and deem himself the natural heir to L. Ron Hubbard. Miscavige got rid of the Broekers.
Yeah, what do you mean get rid of or take out?
Okay, Pat Broeker was threatened with, I'm going to turn you over to the IRS for criminal prosecution because you carried briefcases full of hundreds of thousands of dollars of cash to L. Ron Hubbard because they couldn't pay. He was incognito, so they couldn't use credit cards. They bought everything with cash, ranches, cars, whatever, and Pat Broeker was the guy that did it, and there was no accounting for it. And so Pat Broeker effectively agreed to go off and live his life, never speaking about Scientology again.
I gotta jump in. The irony of Miscavige being able to get rid of Pat Broeker by threatening to turn him over to the IRS for having illegally funneled, and illegally because they didn't pay taxes on the money, illegally funneled like millions and millions and millions of dollars to L. Ron Hubbard. And also they would like stash this money in like the walls of different houses and stuff. Like what they did with the cash was definitely could be prosecuted as a violation of tax law. Just the fact that Miscavige would actually turn another Scientologist, a senior level Scientologist, over to the IRS, it's hilarious to me.
And he is alive to this day and has never said a word.
His wife died from cancer in 2012 or something, and he
lived in Czech Republic, and
He did.
They traced him for 25 years, and he spent $32,000 a month on detectives. All that. Is this the guy?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
the guy. That's the one. But putting aside Pat and Annie, who were the natural sort of ones to follow in Hubbard's footsteps, and I make a big point in the book. Hubbard wrote about everything in his life, like every single little thing, and he'd send out these things called Ron's journals. Hi, everybody, this is what I'm up to. Here's what's happening. This is what we're doing, blah, 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 blah. But he never said anything about this is what happens at the end of my life.
There was no written succession plan.
There was no written or spoken succession plan. Typically, he would have recorded in his voice, here I am, and this is what's, blah, 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 and I'm getting to the end of my life, and I'm going to move off, and blah, 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 and this person is going to take over, and blah, blah, blah. None of that. And this story was invented that he had causatively departed his body to continue his research into the upper levels of spiritual enlightenment. Yeah, that was a complete bullshit story because if Hubbard had been known by Scientologists to have died of a stroke after having suffered earlier strokes with pancreatitis and babbling almost incoherently at the end of his life, that would have been a big blow to the idea that, well, my technology will solve all kinds of problems and your health issues and your mental incapacities, et cetera, if Hubbard had ended up being in very poor physical condition and even mental condition at the end of his life. So this story was invented that was presented to the Scientology world, and I talk about that in there too.
Okay, I'm going to stop the clip there. I'm actually going to do a reaction video soon to the, there's a video that exists online of the event where they announced the passing of L. Ron Hubbard. And this is actually the first time Scientologists are meeting David Miscavige and see, who is this little young guy, speaking on behalf of L. Ron Hubbard here. It's actually the first time Miscavige sort of had his little debutante ball moment with the Scientology public. And Pat Broeker also speaks at that event. And for all you Scientologists and under the radar Scientologists and on the fence Scientologists who are watching this video, just think about it for a moment. You know damn well that LRH used the Ron's Journal lectures as when he took an opportunity to address the Scientology public and brief them on the updates or new news about this or new news about that. And that if L. Ron Hubbard actually had a solid succession plan, he would have himself communicated it to the Scientologists. And the fact that he didn't have a real succession plan, I mean, even here we're talking about the one that involves Pat and Annie Broeker, even that he didn't do a lecture about. Although there was something that happened with Pat and Annie Broeker after L. Ron Hubbard died that Scientologists have no memory of because the historical record has been destroyed. When L. Ron Hubbard passed, he issued, I don't know if you want to call it a bulletin or a memo or a directive, promoting himself from Commodore to Admiral and appointing Pat Broeker and Annie Broeker to the rank, the Sea Org rank of loyal officer, which really is a rank that doesn't exist, it didn't exist, it was a new thing. And this promotion of Pat and Annie to loyal officer is what was going to allow them to essentially take control of the Sea organization. This was published, this was mimicked, this was distributed to all of international management and the Commodore's messenger org staff. For those of you Scientologists, you know what I'm talking about. David Miscavige had, after this was already mimeoed and copied and distributed, David Miscavige had every copy of this rounded up and destroyed and said that it was a forgery and it was fraudulent and it was part of, some plan to usurp control of Scientology. When in reality, what that was the actual plan. And I cannot believe the media and the press have left Pat Broeker alone. The guy who spent the last 6 years of L. Ron Hubbard's life with him is still alive and he's still out there. He's not even that old. The guy who could testify, testify implies a court of law. Who cares? He should just do a podcast interview. Could talk about how L. Ron Hubbard enriched himself personally to the tunes of tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, secretly from the cash being brought in by the Church of Scientology. That guy's out there and he's alive. And I can't believe that anyone leaves this guy alone. The guy who could literally testify or speak to the fact that Miscavige stole control of the Church of Scientology for himself by threatening and blackmailing Pat Broeker. He's out there, guys. He's alive. He exists. And the press leave him alone. I can't even believe it. And Scientologists have no idea. Scientologists have never heard of Pat Broeker or Annie Broeker unless they were around at that time and actually worked with them. Pat Broeker walked away and never spoke to any Scientologist ever again. And Miscavige was so paranoid, he paid 2 private investigators tens of millions of dollars to follow Pat Broeker, tap his phones, monitor his travel, move in next to him, literally tap his phones and listen to all of his conversations. These guys followed Pat Broeker for 25 years. These 2 private investigators worked for nobody but Scientology and worked on no other projects other than Pat Broeker for 25 years. And we know about that because a handful of years ago, David Miscavige had a little hissy fit and stopped paying those 2 private investigators. And they started speaking publicly. And they aired a lot of dirty laundry until Scientology came back into the scene and said, okay, fine, we'll give you a ton of money to shut up and go away. And then that's what those 2 private investigators did. They stopped talking and they went away. But Google it. If I might include some links to some of the articles about these 2 PIs in the description down below. But, you know, this might seem like just kind of a curious, interesting little thing to people who don't understand that to a Scientologist, the fact that David Miscavige was never supposed to be the one to take over control of Scientology is like kind of a big deal. And since it is such a big deal, that's why I wanted to just do a little standalone video about that subject, and I wanted you to be able to hear it from the mouth of Mike Rinder himself, who was there, who did work with Pat and Annie, who did work with David Miscavige, and who talks about all of this and much, much more in his book called A Billion Years. By the way, if you haven't bought it yet, you gotta read this book. If you like audiobooks, as I do, get the audiobook. Mike narrates it himself, and it's just a phenomenal listen. So that's all I have on this. Before I go, let me make my little plug for the Aftermath Foundation and these adorable little Mike Rinder bobbleheads. You know you want one. So you can get these bobbleheads over at the spshop.com. All the proceeds from the SP Shop go to support the Aftermath Foundation, which helps people who are escaping from Scientology, escaping from the Sea Org, restarting their lives from scratch. Mike Rinder is on the board of the Aftermath Foundation, as am I. We just ordered hundreds more of these, and they're not doing us any good on the shelves, guys. So get yours today over at the spshop.com. All right, everybody, thank you for watching and listening. Thank you to everyone who watches until the very end, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe